Erev Tov Rabotai, we're continuing with our Mishna Yomi, Masechet Demai. We're up to Perek Zayin, Mishnah Chet, the final Mishnah in Masechet Demai. The Mishnah is going to discuss now 5 cases in which someone designated Maaser Rishon from some of his wine barrels, but he forgot from which barrel he designated it. The Mishnah is going to teach us what's the best way to separate the Maaser Rishon to permit the most barrels possible. Rabotai, I advise, try to find the Mishnah with a diagram, with a visual illustration, either the art school Mishnah elucidated or Mishnah Be'ira, because the best way to learn this Mishnah is by having a diagram in front of you. In the event you don't have an illustration, I will try to explain it as clear as possible. The first case of the Mishnah is like this. If someone has 10 rows of 10 barrels of wine each, meaning he has 100 barrels of wine standing in a square, 10 barrels wide and 10 barrels long. The best way to visualize it is you have a square, 10 by 10. The upper left corner is A, the upper right corner is B, the lower left corner is C, and the lower right corner is D. The Mishnah continues, V'amar, and he said, Shura chitzona achat maaser, in the outer row of these 100 barrels, I designated one barrel as maaser rishon for wine I have somewhere else. Then yadua ezohi, but he doesn't know now which outer row it was, meaning he forgot from which of the 4 outer rows he had specified. Now, since there are 4 outer rows, the maaser rishon barrel might be in any of the 4, which is A, B, C, and D. So the Mishnah now, obviously the Mefarshim explain, we're talking about a case where the owner has no other Maaser Rishon wine in which he could separate Tumat Maaser on behalf of these 100 barrels. Therefore, he has to separate Tumat Maaser from one of these barrels. Obviously, the owner can take out 4 barrels, one from each of the outer rows. But if he does this, he's going to have to give Tumat Maaser from all 4. The Mishnah is going to give away that the owner can separate the Maaser and Tumat Maaser with the most minimum loss possible. The same thing is going to be by the other cases. So the Mishnah says, Notel shte chaviyot lochsan. He should take 2 corner barrels that are diagonally across from each other, meaning he's going to take the barrel that is on the upper left corner A and the barrel that is on the lower left corner D, which are diagonally from each other. Now he pours these 2 barrels of wine into one larger barrel and he designates that as Maaser Rishon. Since each corner barrel is part of 2 rows, the A is part of the upper left corner A is also part of C and also part of B, and the lower left corner D is also part of C and also part of B. Since it's part of 2 rows, 2 corner barrels that are diagonally across from each other represent all the 4 outer rows. So now whichever row he originally designated is now represented by these 2 barrels. Because again, like we said, the barrel in the corner A is part of row A and B, and also part of row A and C, and the one in corner D is also part of row B and D, and also part of C and D. Like I said, Rabotai, images will make the Mishnah much easier. The second case the Mishnah gives now, Chatzi shura chitzona achat maaser. If he said, in half of an outer row of these 100 barrels, I designated 1 barrel as Maaser Rishon for the wine I have elsewhere. Ven yadua ezohi, but now he doesn't know which half a row was, meaning he forgot which of the 8 outer half rows he specified. The Mishnah says, again, because the Mefarshim explains, since there are 4 outer rows, there are 8 half outer rows, which each have 5 barrels. The Mishnah says, Notel arba chaviyot me'arba zaviyot. He should take 4 barrels, 1 from each of the 4 corners. So you take from the upper left corner A, upper right corner B, lower left corner C, and lower left corner D. Pour all this wine into one larger barrel, designate as Maaser Rishon, because since each corner barrel is part of 2 half rows, the 4 barrels represent all 8 half rows. So now whichever half row you designated is now represented by all 4 barrels, because again, you're going to pour all the 4 barrels into one large barrel, separate 10% as Tumat Maaser, and that will be taken care of. The Mishnah gives the third case, Shua Achat Maaser. If he said, in one row of these 100 barrels, I designated 1 barrel as Maaser Rishon for wine that I have elsewhere, then Yadu Ezohi, but now he doesn't know which one it is, because in this case, what are we talking about? He designated one of the rows, not necessarily an outer row. He could have meant any one of the rows. Then Yadu Ezohi, he doesn't know which one it is. Notel shura achat lochsan. Again, if you look at a diagram, it'll show he should take 1 diagonal row of barrels, either from A to D or from B to C, altogether being 10 barrels of wine. pour them all into one larger barrel, designated as Maser Rishon, because now, since a diagonal row of barrels contains one barrel from each of the 10 rows, whichever row he designated is now represented in these 10. That's true whether the rows are counted from east to west or from north to south. If you look at the Rav, he explains after you pour these 10 barrels into the wine, into the larger container, you separate 10% of it, 1 barrel's worth, as Tumat Maaser, and you give that to the Kohen. That'll take care of that case. The fourth case the Mishnah gives, Chatzi Shua Chad Maaser, if he said in 1/2 row of these 100 barrels, I designated 1 barrel as Maser Rishon for wine that I have elsewhere. Ven Yadu Ezu, and again, he doesn't know which half row it is. Notel Shtei Shurot Nuchsan, he should take 2 diagonal rows of barrels, pour them into 1 larger container, designated as Maser Rishon. And Mifrashim explain, when we say you should take 2 diagonal rows, we're talking about from A to D and from B to C, 20 barrels in all. And again, if you look at the diagram, you're basically taking again from A to D, but 5 rows at a time. So 5, 10, 15, and 20 barrels all together. Pour them into 1 large container, separate as Maser Rishon. Then 10% of that from this large container you take and give to the Kohen as the Tirumat Maaser. Now, since the 2 diagonal rows of the barrels contain 1 barrel from each half row, whichever half row you originally designated is now represented in these 20 barrels. In the 5th case of the Mishnah, Chavit Achat Maaser. If instead of designating 1 of the rows, he said in 1 of these barrels, I designated Maser Rishon for the wine I have elsewhere. Meaning, what did he do? He designated part of 1 barrel as Maser Rishon for Tedel that he has somewhere else. Then Yadua Ezri, but now he doesn't know which of the 100 barrels he designated. Notel mikol chavit v'chavit. The Mishnah says he should take the amount that he needs for Tirumat Maaser from each of the 100 barrels, pour them all into 1 large container, and you designate that as Tumat Maaser. And the Mifrashim explain, let's say, for example, if he designated 1/10 of 1 of the barrels as Maaser Rishon, for example, if he designated 1/10 of 1 of the barrels as Maaser Rishon, you separate 1/10 from each barrel, combine them into 1 barrel, and then designate 1/10 of the mixture, which is 1 barrel's worth, as Tumat Maaser. In this way, you're going to make sure that you have Tumat Maaser from the 1 barrel that had Maaser Rishon in it, because again, we don't know which of the 100 barrels he designated. That is the end, Rabotai, of Mesechet Demai. Baruch Hashem, we completed the Mesechet. Chazaku Baruch. We are now going to start Mesechet Kilayim. I want to read to you the general introduction that the art school gives us just to explain what Mesechet Kilayim talks about. Now, Rabotai, Kilayim, the Targum Unkulus, the commentary on the side of the Chumash in Aramaic, in Sefer Vayikra, Parak Yutet, Pasuk Yutet, 1919, he translates Kilayim as Eruvin. Eruvin is a mixture or a jumble of things, when you mix things together. So, Mesechet Kilayim will deal with the Torah's prohibition to plant different species of vegetables and grain together, or to graft 1 species of plant onto another, or plant seeds of vegetables and grains in or near a grapevine or a vineyard. All these combinations are known as Kilayim, which again means a mixture or a jumble of things. Also included in Kilayim is the prohibition of mating animals from different species with each other, or working with different species of animals, and wearing clothing that contain both wool and linen. That type of Kilayim we also know, more popularly known as Shatnez. Most of these prohibitions are in 1 pasuk in Sefer Vayikra, like we said, chapter 19, verse 19, Parak Yutet, pasuk Yutet. The Torah says, Et chukotai tishmoru, you shall follow my decrees. Be'emtecha lo tarbia, kilayim sadecha lo tizra, kilayim ubeged kilayim chadnez lo ele alecha. Your animal you shall not make kilayim, your field you shall not plant kilayim, and a garment of shatnez mixture shall not come upon you. That last prohibition of wearing shatnez is repeated again in several dvarim in Parak Chabet pasuk Yud Aleph 22:11. Lo tilba shatnez. You are not allowed to wear shatnez, wool and linen together. The prohibition on planting in a vineyard and on working with animals of different species are in Psukim Yud and Tet over there. And Lo tizra karmechat kilayim pen tikdash hameleah zera asher tizra u'tvuat hakarim. You shall not plant your vineyard Kilayim, so that the growth of the seed you plant not become forbidden, along with the product of the vineyard. Lo tacharosh b'shor u'b'chamor yachdav. You shall not plow with an ox or a donkey together. Right now, primarily in Parak Aleph Mishnah Aleph, we're going to discuss the prohibition of planting different kinds of species together or growing them next to each other. This prohibition, the Mefarshim explain, it only applies to plants from different species, but not to plants that are merely different varieties of the same species. Now, if you look at the Chazon Ish in Kilayim Perek Gimel Aleph, he notes to us a very important concept to have while we learn these different species. The Torah system of clarifying the species is not the same as the modern scientific system of classification. It's very possible that two plants that do not look alike are considered members of the same species regarding Kilayim because of their internal qualities. Like example, the nutritional merits are the same. This was determined by the Chachamim, sometimes from tradition, other times from Ruach HaKodesh. But again, that's what we're going to be working on, not the scientific explanation of different species, rather what the sages determined are different species. Now again, Rabotai, the Mishnah is going to list 6 pairs of plants. Now, even though the members of each plant are somewhat different from the other, the Mishnah teaches they are both considered part of the same species and therefore not kilayim with each other. They are kilayim with members of any other pairs, but with each other they're not kilayim. The Mishnah says, Hachitim, Bazunin, Enan Klaim Zebazeh. Rabotai, just to also make a preface, there are many different ways to translate these words and what species they are. The commentaries bring many different ways. I'm going to read it to you the way the Art Scroll brings it down in the Elucidated. They take one of the opinions either for the Rav or the Rambam. But again, there are many different ways to translate these words into what species they are. Hachitim, Bazunin, Enan Klaim Zebazeh. Wheat and darnel are not kilayim with each other. Darnel, again, we're not familiar with it. It's a weed that grows in wheat fields. It looks so much like a wheat plant until the ear appears that it is sometimes referred to as false wheat. According to the Chachamim, the sages' tradition, it is an irregular form of wheat that developed in the generation before the flood, when the earth began producing mutated forms, which is why it's called zonin. Zonin comes from the lashon of promiscuous. Therefore, darnel, if you look at the Rav, he explains it's considered a variety of wheat with regard to the laws of Kilayim. Darnel is not fit for human consumption. However, the laws of Kilayim apply to it because it is used as feed for certain kinds of birds. A plant that is not fit even for birds or animals is not subject to laws of Kilayim. But since here this darnel is subject to can be fed to birds, it is subject to laws of Kilayim. So again, wheat and darnel are not Kilayim with each other. Hasirim, shibolet shual, barley and oats. Again, when we say shibolet shual is oats, we're following the Rav. Again, however, there are other ways to understand it. Now, even though oats and barley do not look like each other, they are still considered one species based off tradition from the sages. Hakusmin vashipon, spelt and rye, they are considered the same species. There's no Kilayim. Hapol vasapir, the broad bean and the Nile cowpea, again, following the way the Art Scroll translates it. The broad bean is also known as the faba bean. The Nile cowpea is a type of pea grown in Egypt. They are the same species, no Kilayim. Hapulkedan vatofach, the grass pea and the red grass pea, again, based on how they explain it. Upol alavan vasheshuim, the white bean and the hyacinth bean, again, based on how they explain it. Enam kilayim zebazeh, these are not kilayim with each other. They are the same species. They can be planted together or in the near proximity of each other. That is the name of this Mishna Yomi, Rabotai. Again, Chazak u'Baruch, and the completion of Masechet Demai. Baruch Adonai le'olam, amen v'amen.